The sunset painted the western sky a brilliant orange as Virginia Carson hurried through the dusty streets of Del Rio, Texas, clutching a crumpled letter to her chest. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she had just received the news that would change her life forever. Her intended husband had called off their engagement. Not through a proper conversation or even in person, but through a tersely worded note delivered by his young brother who couldn't meet her eyes as he handed it over. Virginia ducked into the narrow alley between the general store and Mrs. Henderson's dress shop, finally allowing the tears to fall freely down her flushed cheeks. The letter's cruel words burned in her mind. Upon further consideration and consultation with my family, I must withdraw my proposal. A man in my position requires a wife of more delicate proportions. She had known Thomas Blackwell's mother disapproved of her figure. The woman had made thinly veiled comments about Virginia's robust frame since their first meeting. But Thomas had always assured her that he found her beautiful, until now. The sound of approaching footsteps forced Virginia to quickly wipe her tears and straighten her posture. She refused to give the gossips of Del Rio any more fodder than they already had. "Miss Carson," a deep voice called from the street, "is that you hiding back there?" Virginia recognized the voice of Sheriff McCormick and stepped reluctantly into view. "Good evening, Sheriff. Just taking a shortcut home." The older man's kind eyes took in her reddened face and his expression softened. "I heard about Thomas. His mother's been talking all over town." He shook his head in disgust. "That woman never deserved someone like you in her family anyway." Virginia managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I should be getting home. My father will be waiting." The sheriff nodded and tipped his hat as she moved past him, heading toward the modest home she shared with her father at the edge of town. With each step, her humiliation grew. By tomorrow, everyone in Del Rio would know that Thomas Blackwell had rejected Virginia Carson for being too fat. The Carson home was small but comfortable, with a well-tended garden that Virginia meticulously cared for. Her father, Martin Carson, was a blacksmith who had raised Virginia alone since her mother's death when Virginia was just 12. He looked up from his newspaper as she entered, immediately noticing her distress. "It's Thomas, isn't it?" he asked, setting aside his reading. Virginia nodded, unable to speak as fresh tears threatened. Martin Carson sighed heavily. "I had a feeling when I saw his mother at the mercantile today." She was smiling like a cat that got the cream. He rose and embraced his daughter. "Their loss, Virginia, their tremendous loss. Everyone will be talking about me," she whispered against his shoulder. "You know how this town is." Her father pulled back to look her in the eyes. "Then let's not give them the satisfaction. I've been thinking it might be time for a change anyway." He guided her to the table where a different letter lay open. "This came today from your Uncle Robert in San Antonio. He's expanding his freight business and needs help. Says there's opportunity for both of us there." Virginia stared at the letter. "Leave Del Rio, but this has always been our home." "A home should comfort you, not cause you pain," her father said firmly. "I've watched how some folks in this town have treated you over the years." The whispers, the sideways glances. "I've held my tongue because you seemed content enough, but I won't stand by while they humiliate my daughter." Virginia considered her father's words. Del Rio had never truly embraced her. Even as a young girl, she'd been larger than the other children, and the teasing had been relentless. As she'd grown into a woman, the cruelty had simply become more subtle, backhanded compliments about her pretty face and comments about finding a husband who wouldn't mind a woman with something to hold on to. Thomas had been different, or so she'd thought. He'd courted her properly, admired her gardening skills and her cooking. He'd said he loved the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, but in the end, he'd chosen his family's approval over her. "When would we leave?" she asked quietly. "I thought we might start packing tomorrow." "Be ready to leave by the end of next week." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "San Antonio's a bigger place, Ginny. People there mind their own business more." That night, Virginia lay awake in her bed, her mind racing with thoughts of leaving the only home she'd ever known. Despite the pain Del Rio had caused her, the prospect of starting anew in a strange city filled her with trepidation. Still, As the first light of dawn crept through her window, she had made up her mind. It was time for a fresh start. The next week passed in a flurry of activity. Virginia and her father sold what furniture they couldn't take with them, packed their essential belongings, and made arrangements for the journey. True to her father's prediction, gossip about Virginia's broken engagement spread through town like wildfire. She endured pitying looks and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker, was one of the few who showed genuine kindness. "I've made something for you," she said when Virginia came to say goodbye. She handed over a package wrapped in brown paper. A going-away present. Inside was a beautifully crafted dress in a deep forest green. "It will bring out your eyes," Mrs. Henderson said softly, "and it's designed to flatter your figure, not hide it. There's nothing wrong with your body, Virginia. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." On their final morning in Del Rio, Virginia donned the new dress for their journey. As she and her father loaded the last of their belongings onto the wagon, she felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. This town held all her memories, both sweet and bitter, but ahead lay possibilities unknown. The journey to San Antonio took 3 days, traveling at a steady pace with overnight stops at way stations along the route. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Virginia was struck by its size and vibrancy compared to Del Rio. Buildings stretched higher, streets teemed with more people than she'd ever seen in one place, and the sounds and smells were overwhelming. Uncle Robert's freight yard was located near the railroad station on the city's western edge. As their wagon pulled through the gates, Virginia spotted a tall, broad-shouldered man directing workers loading crates onto a wagon. He turned at their approach, his face breaking into a wide smile that immediately reminded Virginia of her father. "Martin, and this can't be little Virginia." Robert Carson strode toward them, arms outstretched. "Last time I saw you, you were knee-high to a grasshopper." Virginia laughed as her uncle enveloped her in a bear hug. "It's been too long, Uncle Robert. That it has." He stepped back to look at her. "You're the spitting image of your mother, God rest her soul." Her uncle had arranged living quarters for them above the freight office, a spacious apartment with 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and windows that overlooked the bustling yard below. It was larger than their home in Del Rio, and Virginia fell in love with it immediately. "I hope you don't mind the noise," Robert said as he showed them around. "Freight business never really sleeps." "It's perfect," Virginia assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange their belongings to make it feel like home. That evening, as they sat down to a welcome dinner prepared by Robert's housekeeper, her uncle outlined his plans. "Martin, I need someone to oversee the smithing work, wagon repairs, horseshoes, that sort of thing. And Virginia, I could use help with the books and correspondence if you're willing." "My previous clerk moved to Dallas last month." Virginia's eyes widened. "You want me to work in the business?" Robert nodded. "Your father tells me you have a good head for figures and your penmanship is better than mine. The pay's fair and you'll be treated with respect." She glanced at her father, who smiled encouragingly. In Del Rio, it would have been considered inappropriate for an unmarried woman to work in such a capacity, but San Antonio seemed to operate by different rules. "I'd like that very much," she replied, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Virginia rose early, eager to begin her new role. She chose another of her new dresses, a practical navy blue with white trim, and pinned her chestnut hair into a neat bun. As she entered the freight office, she was struck by the organized chaos of the operation. Men moved purposefully between wagons, loading and unloading crates, while others tended to horses or repaired equipment. Robert introduced her to the staff, mostly men who tipped their hats respectfully, though a few eyed her with curiosity. "This here's my niece, Miss Virginia Carson," he announced. "She'll be handling the books and correspondence from now on, so you'll answer to her on matters of payment and scheduling." The office itself was a small room with a large desk covered in papers, ledgers stacked haphazardly on shelves, and a window that provided a view of the entire yard. Virginia ran her fingers over the dusty ledgers, already forming a plan to bring order to the apparent chaos. "It's a bit of a mess," Robert admitted sheepishly. "Been handling it myself since Gaines left, but numbers were never my strong suit." "I'll have it sorted in no time," Virginia assured him, already rolling up her sleeves. As she immersed herself in organizing the freight company's records, Virginia found a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in Del Rio. Her days were filled with meaningful work, and for once, her worth was measured by her competence rather than her appearance. One morning, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Virginia was deeply focused on reconciling a discrepancy in the delivery records when the office door swung open. She looked up, expecting to see her uncle or one of the regular workers, but instead found herself facing a stranger. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and sandy hair that curled slightly at the edges of his hat. His clothes were trail-worn but clean: a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into well-used boots. But what caught Virginia's attention most were his eyes, a startling shade of blue that crinkled slightly at the corners as he studied her with equal curiosity. "You're not Gaines," he stated, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Virginia straightened in her chair. "No, I'm not. Mr. Gaines left for Dallas. I'm Virginia Carson, Mr. Robert Carson's niece." The man removed his hat, revealing more of that sandy hair. "Yates Keller, madam. I run supplies between here and Fort Stockton." He approached the desk, extending a weather-roughened hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Virginia hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and she noticed calluses that spoke of hard work. "What can I help you with, Mr. Keller?" she asked, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the unexpected flutter in her stomach. He placed a folded paper on her desk. "Got a delivery manifest for your uncle. Brought in some specialty items from El Paso that weren't on the regular schedule." As Virginia examined the manifest, she was acutely aware of Yates Keller's gaze. Unlike the look she'd grown accustomed to in Del Rio, pitying, judging, or simply dismissive, his eyes held nothing but straightforward interest. "Everything appears to be in order," she said, reaching for the company ledger. "Will you be staying in San Antonio long?" "A few days," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Need to rest the horses and pick up supplies for the return journey." Virginia nodded and made the appropriate notations in the ledger. "Your payment will be ready tomorrow morning, Mr. Keller." He tipped his hat. "I'll be back then, Miss Carson." At the door, he paused and turned back. "Your uncle made a smart decision hiring you. Gaines could never keep those books straight." Before Virginia could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of leather and open plains. That evening at dinner, Virginia found herself uncharacteristically curious about one of her uncle's contractors. "I met Yates Keller today," she mentioned casually as she passed the potatoes to her father. Robert nodded appreciatively. "Yates is one of my best drivers. Reliable, honest, and knows the territory better than most. Been working with him for about 3 years now. He seemed capable," Virginia offered, trying to sound neutral. Her uncle chuckled. "That he is. Started as just another cowboy driving cattle, but he's got a good head on his shoulders. Saved enough to buy his own wagon and team, then started taking on contract work." He studied Virginia with knowing eyes. "He's a good man, if that's what you're asking." Virginia felt her cheeks warm. I was just curious about the people you work with." Her father and uncle exchanged amused glances, but mercifully changed the subject. The next morning, Virginia found herself taking extra care with her appearance. Choosing a burgundy dress that Mrs. Henderson had assured her complemented her figure nicely. She told herself it was simply because she was feeling more confident in her new position, not because she anticipated Yates Keller's return. The freight yard was buzzing with activity when she arrived. A new shipment had come in overnight, and workers were busy sorting and loading various goods. Virginia had just finished preparing the payment for Keller's delivery when a commotion outside caught her attention. Through the window, she saw 2 men squared off in the center of the yard. One was Yates Keller. The other was a burly man she recognized as Jenkins, one of the regular drivers who had been notably cold toward her since her arrival. Virginia hurried to the door, opening it in time to hear Jenkins' raised voice. Don't see why Carson's getting soft, hiring women to do men's work, especially one that size, probably eating into the profits. Yates' response was too quiet for Virginia to hear, but his stance was rigid, hands clenched at his sides. Jenkins took a step forward, jabbing a finger toward Keller's chest. Ain't your business anyway, Keller. You're just passing through. Some of us have to work with his decisions every day. Virginia felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her cheeks. Even here, hundreds of miles from Del Rio, her size was still fodder for ridicule. She was about to retreat back into the office when Yates' voice rose clearly. Miss Carson has done more to straighten out this operation in 2 weeks than Gaines did in 2 years. I suggest you focus on your own work rather than concerning yourself with her qualifications or her appearance. Jenkins scoffed. What's it to you? Got a soft spot for big women, Keller. What happened next was so quick Virginia almost missed it. Yates grabbed Jenkins by the shirt front and pushed him against the nearest wagon. I've got a soft spot for respect, Jenkins, something you seem to be lacking. By now, other workers had gathered, including Robert Carson, who strode purposefully into the fray. What's going on here? Jenkins wrenched himself from Keller's grip, straightening his shirt. Nothing, sir, just a misunderstanding. Robert looked between the two men skeptically. Keller. Yates' eyes flicked briefly to Virginia standing in the doorway before returning to her uncle. Like the man said, just a misunderstanding. Won't happen again. Robert dismissed the gathering crowd and pulled both men aside for a quiet conversation. Virginia retreated into the office, her emotions in turmoil. She was simultaneously mortified that her appearance was once again the subject of discussion and touched by Yates' unexpected defense. When Keller entered the office some 20 minutes later, Virginia was determinedly focused on her ledger, trying to appear unaffected. I've prepared your payment, Mr. Keller, she said formally, pushing an envelope across the desk without looking up. He didn't take it immediately. Miss Carson, about what happened outside, it's nothing I haven't heard before, she interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. There's no need to discuss it. Yates studied her face for a long moment. I disagree. No one should speak about you or any lady in such a manner. Virginia sighed, setting down her pen. Mr. Keller, while I appreciate your gallantry, I learned long ago that people will always have opinions about women who don't fit their ideal of beauty. She gestured to herself. I am fully aware of my figure and have made peace with it. Something flickered in Yates' blue eyes, not pity, as she might have expected, but what looked almost like admiration. I wasn't being gallant, Miss Carson, just honest. He finally took the envelope. Jenkins was wrong on both counts. You're excellent at your job, and there's nothing wrong with the way you look. Before Virginia could formulate a response, he continued, I'm heading out to check on some potential new routes for your uncle. Should be back in about a week. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Carson. After he left, Virginia found it difficult to concentrate on her work. Yates Keller confused her. Most men either avoided looking at her altogether or regarded her with thinly veiled disapproval. A few, like Thomas, had professed to find her attractive despite her size, as if loving her required overlooking a fundamental flaw. But Yates had defended her without condescension or false flattery. He'd simply stated his opinion as fact and moved on. It was refreshingly straightforward, much like the man himself. The week that followed was busy enough to keep Virginia's thoughts mostly occupied with work. Her father had set up the smithy section of the freight yard and was already earning a reputation for quality craftsmanship. Virginia's own efficiency in organizing the company's records had not gone unnoticed, and she found herself treated with increasing respect by most of the workers, though Jenkins remained coldly formal. On Saturday evening, the Carsons attended a social gathering at the home of one of Robert's business associates. It was Virginia's first introduction to San Antonio society, and she approached it with trepidation. Her experiences with social events in Del Rio had rarely been pleasant. You look beautiful, her father assured her as they arrived at the Hendersons' grand home, no relation to Mrs. Henderson of Del Rio. Virginia had worn her green dress and arranged her hair in an elegant style she'd seen in a fashion plate. The Hendersons' parlor was crowded with San Antonio's business elite and their families. Virginia steeled herself for the usual sideways glances and whispered comments, but to her surprise, most people greeted her warmly. Mrs. Henderson, a plump, cheerful woman herself, took Virginia under her wing, introducing her to various guests. "Your uncle tells me you've revolutionized his bookkeeping," Mrs. Henderson said as they helped themselves to refreshments. "Robert was always hopeless with numbers," Virginia smiled. "I enjoy creating order from chaos, a valuable skill." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice conspiratorially, "And I must say that shade of green is perfect with your complexion. Who made your dress?" Mrs. Henderson, another Mrs. Henderson, back in Del Rio. "Well, she has excellent taste. So many dressmakers try to squeeze women of our proportions into styles that don't flatter. I always say, embrace what God gave you." Virginia felt a rush of affection for this straightforward woman who spoke of their shared body type with such casual acceptance. The evening progressed pleasantly as Virginia found herself engaged in genuine conversation rather than standing awkwardly at the edges as she had so often in Del Rio. Several young men even asked her to dance, treating her with courtesy if not particular interest. She was taking a moment's respite from the dancing when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Miss Carson." Virginia turned to find Yates Keller standing there, looking almost unrecognizable in a well-tailored dark suit, his usually windswept hair neatly combed. "Mr. Keller," she replied, unable to hide her surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The Hendersons invite me when I'm in town. Mrs. Henderson was friends with my mother." Virginia nodded, suddenly conscious of her flushed cheeks from dancing. "You clean up well," she said before she could stop herself, then blushed deeper at her forwardness. Yates laughed, a warm, rich sound. "As do you, Miss Carson, though you're always." He paused, seeming to search for the right word, striking. Before Virginia could respond, the musicians began a new tune, a waltz. Yates extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" Virginia hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "You may." As he led her onto the floor, Virginia was acutely aware of the differences between them. He was tall and lean, while she was of medium height with generous curves. In Del Rio, such a pairing on the dance floor would have invited snickers. But as Yates placed his hand respectfully at her waist and guided her into the dance, she found herself caring less about what others might think. "You dance well," she commented as they moved smoothly among the other couples. "My mother insisted," he replied with a half-smile. "Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like an unbroken colt." Virginia laughed at the image. "And where is your mother now?" A shadow crossed his face. "She passed 5 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Virginia said softly. "I lost my mother when I was 12. It never quite leaves you." Yates nodded in understanding, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "No, it doesn't." They danced in comfortable silence for a few moments before he spoke again. "How are you finding San Antonio compared to Del Rio?" "Different," Virginia replied honestly. "Bigger, of course, but also freer somehow. San Antonio has always been a place where people can reinvent themselves," Yates observed. "It's what I like about it. Your past doesn't matter as much as what you choose to do now." Virginia considered his words. "Is that what you did, reinvented yourself?" His blue eyes held hers. "In a way. I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back and a determination to be my own man. San Antonio gave me that chance." As the music drew to a close, Yates surprised her by not immediately releasing her hand. "Would you consider taking a walk with me tomorrow afternoon? I know a path along the river that's quite pleasant." Virginia found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the implications. "I'd like that." The next day dawned bright and clear, perfect for a riverside walk. Virginia chose a simple but becoming blue dress and a straw hat to shield her face from the Texas sun. Her father raised an eyebrow when she mentioned her plans but made no objection. "Yates Keller seems a decent sort," was all he said. "Be home before dark." Yates called for her at 2 o'clock, dressed more casually than the previous evening but still neat in clean trousers and a fresh shirt. He offered his arm as they set off toward the San Antonio River. The path was indeed pleasant, winding along the riverbank under the shade of cottonwood trees. Other couples and families were enjoying the fine weather, and Virginia noticed with some surprise that no one gave them a second glance. "You mentioned yesterday that you came to San Antonio with nothing," Virginia said as they walked. "Where were you before?" Yates guided her around a muddy patch on the path. "All over, really. My father was a drover, moving cattle from Texas to railheads up north. We never stayed in one place long." He glanced at her. "After he died, I kept up the same work until I realized I wanted something more permanent." "And that's when you started your freight business," he nodded. "Saved every penny from 3 cattle drives to buy my first wagon and team. Your uncle gave me my first contracts when no one else would take a chance on me." Virginia smiled. "That sounds like Uncle Robert. He's always believed in giving people opportunities. Like he did with you," Yates observed. "Yes," Virginia agreed softly, "though I sometimes wonder if he offered me the position out of charity rather than confidence in my abilities." Yates stopped walking and turned to face her. "Having seen your work, I can assure you it wasn't charity. You've brought order to what was frankly a mess." His direct gaze made Virginia's cheeks warm. "Thank you. I've always enjoyed working with numbers and organizing things." In Del Rio, there wasn't much opportunity for a woman to use such skills professionally. They resumed walking, and Yates asked carefully, "May I ask why you left Del Rio? Your uncle mentioned it was a rather sudden decision." Virginia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She had no desire to present herself as a jilted woman, especially to this man whose opinion suddenly mattered to her. "It was time for a change," she said finally. "Del Rio had limited possibilities for someone like me." Yates seemed to sense there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, he directed her attention to a blue heron wading at the river's edge. "Beautiful creatures. Patient, too. They'll stand like that for hours waiting for the perfect moment." They watched in companionable silence as the heron suddenly struck, emerging with a small fish in its beak. "Patience rewarded," Virginia remarked. "Most worthwhile things require patience," Yates agreed, his eyes finding hers again with an intensity that made her breath catch. The remainder of their walk was filled with easier conversation books they'd read, places Yates had traveled, Virginia's love of gardening. By the time they returned to the Carson home, Virginia felt more at ease with Yates Keller than she'd ever felt with Thomas, despite their years of acquaintance. At her door, Yates removed his hat. "I'm leaving for Fort Davis tomorrow," he said. "Should be gone about 3 weeks." Virginia felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "That's a long journey." "It is," he agreed, "but necessary. Your uncle has some valuable contracts out that way." He hesitated, then asked, "Would it be presumptuous to ask if I might write to you while I'm gone?" Virginia's heart quickened. "I would like that very much." His smile warmed his entire face. "Then I shall. Thank you for accompanying me today, Miss Carson. It's been a genuine pleasure." As Virginia watched him walk away, she was struck by how different this feeling was from her courtship with Thomas. With Thomas, there had always been a sense that she needed to be grateful for his attention, that she was somehow lucky he had chosen her despite her size. With Yates, she felt valued not despite anything but simply for herself. The next morning, Virginia arrived at the freight office earlier than usual. She knew Yates would be departing and wanted a chance to wish him well on his journey. She found him in the yard, securing the last of his supplies to his wagon. "Miss Carson," he greeted her, his face lighting up. "I didn't expect to see you before I left." Virginia held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Some biscuits for your journey and this." She handed him a small notebook and pencil. "For your letters, the roads can be rough on paper." Yates accepted both gifts with genuine pleasure. "Thank you, this is very thoughtful." They stood awkwardly for a moment before Virginia gathered her courage. "Safe travels, Mr. Keller. I'll look forward to your letters." "And I'll look forward to writing them," he replied. Then, with a sudden decisiveness, he took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips. "Until I return, Miss Carson." The next 3 weeks passed both quickly and agonizingly slowly for Virginia. She threw herself into her work, continuing to improve the freight company's operations. Her father's smithy business flourished, and together they began to feel truly settled in San Antonio. True to his word, Yates wrote. His first letter arrived after a week, a straightforward account of his journey thus far, the conditions of the trails, and the people he'd encountered. But between the factual lines were hints of something more personal. His observations of a particularly beautiful sunset, a funny incident with a stubborn mule, thoughts that he wished he could share with her in person. Virginia read and reread the letter until she knew parts by heart. She composed a careful response, sharing news of San Antonio and the freight yard, her growing friendship with Mrs. Henderson, and her plans to start a small garden behind the freight office. 2 more letters arrived before Yates himself returned, each slightly more personal than the last. In his 3rd letter, he'd written, "I find myself thinking of our riverside walk often. There is a particular bend in the trail outside Fort Davis that reminds me of where we stopped to watch the heron. I paused there yesterday and found myself wishing you were beside me to share the view." When word came that Yates' wagon had been spotted approaching San Antonio, Virginia felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Their correspondence had created a connection between them, but she couldn't help wondering if the reality of seeing him again would match the warmth of his letters. She was busy with invoices when the office door opened. Looking up, she found Yates standing there, his skin more bronzed than before, his clothes dusty from the trail, but his blue eyes as bright and direct as she remembered. "Miss Carson," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Keller," she replied, rising from her desk. "Welcome back." They regarded each other for a moment before both speaking at once. "How was your journey? I hope you received my—" They broke off, laughing at the awkwardness. "Please," Virginia gestured, "you first." Yates stepped further into the office. "I was just going to ask if you received my last letter. I wasn't sure it would arrive before I did." Virginia nodded. "It came yesterday. I'm glad you made it back safely." Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Yates spoke again. "I wondered if you might join me for dinner tomorrow evening. There's a small restaurant near the river that serves excellent food." Virginia's heart leaped. "I'd be delighted." His smile was immediate and genuine. "Wonderful. Shall I call for you at 6?" After he left to report to her uncle, Virginia sat back down at her desk, finding it difficult to focus on her work. Something was happening between her and Yates Keller, something she hadn't expected when she fled Del Rio with a broken heart just weeks ago. That evening, Virginia told her father about the dinner invitation. Martin Carson studied his daughter thoughtfully. "You like this young man?" It wasn't a question, but Virginia answered anyway. "I do, Papa. He's different," Martin nodded slowly. "I've spoken with him several times at the smithy. He seems honorable. Just be careful with your heart, Ginny. It's only been a few months since Thomas." Virginia touched her father's hand. "Thomas never knew me, not really. He saw what he wanted to see until his mother convinced him to see something else." She paused, trying to articulate what made Yates different. "Mr. Keller sees me exactly as I am. I don't think he knows how to do otherwise." The restaurant Yates had chosen was indeed small but charming, with tables set far enough apart for private conversation. Virginia wore her burgundy dress again, having noticed how Yates' eyes had lingered on her the first time he'd seen her in it. Their dinner conversation flowed easily, moving from Yates' recent journey to Virginia's continued adjustments to life in San Antonio. She found herself telling him about Thomas and the broken engagement, something she'd avoided mentioning during their previous encounters. "So that's why you left Del Rio," Yates said when she finished her story. Virginia nodded, tracing the rim of her water glass. "It wasn't just Thomas, though. It was the whole town. The way people looked at me, the comments, the assumptions. I was tired of being judged solely by my appearance." Yates considered her words carefully. People can be cruel about things that don't fit their narrow view of how the world should be. He leaned forward slightly. "For what it's worth, I think Thomas was a fool, and not because he let you go, though that certainly proves his foolishness, but because he allowed others to dictate what he should value." Virginia felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Thank you." "It's not flattery, Virginia," he said, using her given name for the first time, "just truth." After dinner, Yates suggested a short walk before returning her home. The evening was pleasant, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the river. They strolled side by side, occasionally brushing arms. "I'll be staying in San Antonio for at least 3 weeks before my next long haul," Yates mentioned. "Your uncle wants me to help train some new drivers." Virginia smiled. "That's good news." "I thought so," he agreed, his tone suggesting he was pleased for reasons beyond the work. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might be willing to see more of me during that time." Virginia stopped walking and turned to face him. "Are you courting me, Mr. Keller?" Yates met her gaze steadily. "I'm trying to, Miss Carson, though I admit I'm a bit out of practice." A laugh bubbled up from Virginia's throat. "Well, you're doing fine so far." He took her hand then, his expression growing serious. "I don't want there to be any misunderstandings between us, Virginia. I admire your intelligence, your resilience, your kindness. And yes, I find you beautiful." "All of you?" Virginia felt tears prickling behind her eyes at the simple honesty in his voice. "I believe you," she whispered, and for the first time in her life, she truly did believe a man who called her beautiful. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Virginia's life. True to his word, Yates courted her properly, taking her on drives through the countryside, escorting her to church on Sundays, joining the Carson family for dinner. They attended another of the Hendersons' social gatherings, where Yates proudly kept Virginia at his side all evening. What Virginia appreciated most was how comfortable she felt in his presence. There was none of the constant awareness of her size that she'd felt with Thomas, no sense that she needed to make herself smaller or apologize for taking up space. Yates' arm would curve naturally around her waist as they walked. His hand would engulf hers completely when they held hands. And when they danced, he held her with a sureness that suggested he found her exactly right. One evening, as they sat on a bench in the small garden Virginia had started behind the freight office, Yates asked about her childhood. "It was happy until my mother died," Virginia told him. "After that, things were harder. Not just because we missed her, but because without her, I had no buffer against the world's opinions." "What do you mean?" Yates asked, his arm resting along the back of the bench behind her. Virginia sighed. "My mother was like me, curvy, as she called it. She taught me to hold my head high, to remember that beauty comes in all shapes. After she was gone, it was just my father and me, and though he tried, he didn't know how to help a young girl navigate those waters." She plucked a leaf from a nearby plant, twirling it between her fingers. "The other girls could be cruel, boys too, and as I got older it only got worse. Women in town would offer unsolicited advice on how to reduce or make comments about finding a husband despite my challenge." Yates' jaw tightened visibly. "People can be heartless." "They can," Virginia agreed. "But there were kind ones too. Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker in Del Rio, not your Mrs. Henderson, she always made me feel beautiful in her creations. And my father never, ever suggested I should be different." Yates took her hand. "I'm glad you had them. And I'm sorry for those who made you feel less than the remarkable woman you are." Virginia looked at him curiously. "You've never once seemed bothered by my size. Most men either avoid looking at me altogether or make it clear they're making an exception in finding me attractive." Yates seemed genuinely puzzled. "Why would I be bothered? You're exactly as a woman should be." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "My mother was built like you, strong, substantial. My father used to say she was the perfect size for his arms. That's how I've always thought of it." Virginia's heart skipped at his words. "And is that how you think of me?" Yates met her eyes, his own darkening with emotion. "Virginia, you fit perfectly in my arms, in my life, and if you'll allow it, in my heart." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. It was a gentle kiss, respectful yet full of promise, and when he pulled back, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that this man truly saw her, all of her, and cherished what he saw. The remainder of Yates' time in San Antonio passed in a blur of shared moments and deepening feelings. When the day of his departure for his next freight run approached, Virginia found herself dreading the separation more than she'd anticipated. "It's only for 2 weeks this time," Yates reminded her as they walked along their now favorite riverbank path, "and when I return." He stopped walking and turned to face her. Virginia looked up at him questioningly. "Yes," Yates took both her hands in his. "When I return, I'd like to speak with your father." Virginia's breath caught. About, a smile played at his lips. I think you know, Virginia. She did know, and the realization filled her with a joy so complete it almost frightened her. Are you certain? She asked, needing to hear him say it. We've known each other such a short time. I've known cattle drivers who spent 10 years with a woman without truly seeing her, Yates replied, and I've known men who recognized their hearts match in an instant. His hands tightened on hers. I don't need more time to know what I want, Virginia. But if you do, I'll wait. Virginia shook her head, a smile blooming on her face. I don't need more time either. The 2 weeks of Yates' absence passed slowly despite Virginia's busy schedule at the freight office. She found herself watching the road each afternoon, though she knew it was too soon for his return. Her father noticed her distraction and approached her one evening as she sat on their small porch. Yates is a good man, Martin Carson said, settling into the chair beside her. Virginia looked at her father in surprise. Yes, he is, Martin nodded thoughtfully. He came to see me before he left, you know. Virginia's heart skipped. He did, said he wanted my blessing to court you formally when he returns. Her father's eyes crinkled with amusement. As if you two haven't been courting these past weeks, Virginia laughed softly. He's rather traditional in some ways. Nothing wrong with that, Martin observed. He also mentioned he has intentions beyond courting if you're amenable. Virginia felt her cheeks warm. And what did you say? Her father reached over to pat her hand. I said my daughter knows her own mind and heart better than anyone, and if she chooses him, he'll have my blessing. He paused, his expression growing more serious. Are you choosing him, Ginny? Virginia nodded, a certainty settling deep in her soul. I am, Papa. Then I'm happy for you, Martin said simply. You deserve someone who values you properly. On the day Yates was expected to return, Virginia took special care with her appearance, wearing the green dress that had become something of a talisman for her. She went about her work at the freight office with one ear constantly alert for the sound of wagon wheels. It was late afternoon when she heard a commotion in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw Yates' wagon rolling through the gates, dust-covered but intact. Her heart leaped as she spotted him on the driver's bench, looking tired but alert. Virginia forced herself to remain at her desk, not wanting to appear too eager in front of the yard workers. But her resolve crumbled when, minutes later, the office door opened and Yates stood there, trail dust still clinging to his clothes but his blue eyes alight as they found her. Miss Carson, he said formally, though his smile was anything but. Mr. Keller, she replied, rising from her chair. Welcome back. They maintained this pretense of professionalism until Yates had completed his business with Robert Carson and the workers had begun to disperse for the evening. Only then did he return to the office where Virginia was finishing her day's work. Walk with me. He asked, offering his arm. Virginia nodded, setting aside her ledger and taking his arm. They strolled toward the garden she had cultivated behind the office, now flourishing with late summer blooms. I missed you, Yates said simply when they were alone. Virginia squeezed his arm. And I you. They sat on their bench and Yates took both her hands in his. I spoke with your father before I left. He told me, Virginia admitted. Yates looked momentarily surprised, then smiled. I should have known you two are close. We are, Virginia agreed. He said he gave you his blessing. He did, Yates confirmed. Then, with a fluid movement that surprised her, he slid from the bench to one knee before her. Virginia Carson, these past weeks have shown me what I want for my future, and that's a future with you in it. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a modestly sized emerald. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Virginia felt tears of joy welling in her eyes. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Yates, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, then rose to sit beside her again, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they finally broke apart, Virginia couldn't stop smiling. The ring is beautiful. It was my mother's, Yates told her. My father gave it to her when they'd been married 5 years, said he should have had it for her from the start, but couldn't afford it then. His thumb traced gentle circles on her hand. The green reminded me of your eyes. Virginia leaned her head against his shoulder. When shall we be married? I was thinking next month, Yates suggested. I've been saving to buy land outside of town, just 10 acres, but with a good creek running through it and enough space to build a proper home. It won't be ready right away, but your uncle says we can use the apartment above the freight office until our house is built. Virginia marveled at how thoroughly he had planned. Next month sounds perfect. The news of their engagement spread quickly through San Antonio. Mrs. Henderson immediately volunteered to host the wedding at her home, and Virginia found herself welcomed into a circle of women eager to help with preparations. Unlike in Del Rio, where she'd often felt like an outsider, here she was embraced without reservation. One afternoon, as Virginia was being fitted for her wedding dress at Mrs. Henderson's home, the older woman remarked, "You two make a handsome couple. Yates has always been a fine-looking man, but he's positively radiant now." Virginia blushed at the compliment. "He makes me happy, Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly, "As he should, and you clearly do the same for him." She adjusted a fold of fabric at Virginia's waist. "You know, when he first started coming to our gatherings, several young ladies set their caps for him, but he was always polite and nothing more. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The seamstress working on the hem looked up. "It's true, Miss Carson. Mr. Keller came to my shop for his wedding suit and he couldn't stop talking about you, said he'd found a woman perfectly made for his arms." Virginia's blush deepened at hearing Yates' private sentiment repeated, but her heart swelled with joy. For the first time in her life, she felt completely comfortable in her own skin, loved for exactly who and what she was. As the wedding day approached, an unexpected letter arrived from Del Rio. Virginia recognized Thomas Blackwell's handwriting immediately and hesitated before opening it. Her life had changed so dramatically since leaving Del Rio that Thomas seemed like a figure from someone else's past. The letter was brief and surprisingly humble. Thomas wrote that he'd made a terrible mistake in breaking their engagement, that he'd allowed his mother's prejudices to cloud his judgment, and that he missed Virginia desperately. He asked if she would consider forgiving him and renewing their relationship. Virginia read the letter twice, searching for any feelings the words might stir. To her relief, she found none. No anger, no hurt, not even satisfaction at his regret. Thomas Blackwell had simply become irrelevant to her life. She showed the letter to Yates that evening as they sat on the porch of her father's home. He read it silently, his expression unreadable until he reached the end. "What will you tell him?" he asked. Handing the letter back, Virginia took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "That I wish him well, but my heart is engaged elsewhere," she smiled. "Actually, not just my heart, but my hand, my future, and my life." Yates brought their joined hands to his lips. "I'm a fortunate man." Virginia shook her head. "We're both fortunate. To have found each other, to have recognized what we have together." She leaned against his shoulder. "In a way, I should thank Thomas. If he hadn't broken our engagement, I might never have come to San Antonio and met you." "Then I thank him too," Yates murmured against her hair. "Though I'm still of the opinion he was a fool." Virginia laughed softly. "A fortunate fool, perhaps. He's free to find someone his mother approves of, and I'm free to be with someone who approves of all of me." On their wedding day, October 15, 1875, the Henderson home was transformed with autumn flowers and ribbons. Virginia's dress was a masterpiece in ivory satin that celebrated rather than concealed her curves, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves and tiny pearl buttons down the back. As her father prepared to walk her down the aisle formed by rows of chairs in the Hendersons' expansive garden, he looked at her with misty eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you today, Ginny, not just because you're a beautiful bride, but because you've become a woman who knows her own worth." Virginia hugged him tightly. "Thank you for always supporting me, Papa, for never making me feel I needed to be different." The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. Virginia would always remember the look in Yates' eyes when he first saw her walking toward him, a look of such complete adoration and certainty that it banished any last doubts she might have harbored. Their vows were traditional, with one addition that Yates had requested. After promising to love, honor, and cherish Virginia all the days of his life, he added, "I promise to always see you as you truly are, beautiful, strong, and perfectly made for my arms." The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing late into the evening. Virginia found herself surrounded by well-wishers who seemed genuinely happy for her and Yates, a stark contrast to the whispers and sidelong glances she'd grown accustomed to in Del Rio. As the night drew to a close, Yates led his bride to the waiting carriage that would take them to the small hotel where they'd spend their wedding night before beginning the journey to their honeymoon a week at a lakeside cabin owned by Robert Carson. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" Yates asked as he helped her into the carriage. Virginia's heart thrilled at her new name. "Completely, Mr. Keller." Their first month of marriage was a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries. They settled into the apartment above the freight office, making it their temporary home. Virginia continued her work with the company books, while Yates began taking shorter freight routes that allowed him to return to San Antonio every few days rather than being gone for weeks at a time. Construction began on their house outside of town, a modest but sturdy structure that would have 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. Virginia threw herself into planning the interior, while Yates focused on the barn and outbuildings they would need. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire in their apartment going over the house plans, Virginia noticed Yates watching her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside the sketch she'd been showing him. "I was just thinking how different my life is now," he replied, reaching for her hand. "6 months ago, I was a solitary freight driver with no real home. Now I'm a husband building a house, planning for a future that includes more than just the next delivery." Virginia moved to sit beside him on the small sofa. "Are you happy with the change?" Yates wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you? Do you miss anything from your old life?" Virginia considered the question seriously. "I miss my garden in Del Rio sometimes, and Mrs. Henderson the dressmaker, not our Mrs. Henderson," she smiled. "But no, I don't miss my old life. This one is infinitely better." By spring of 1876, their house was completed enough for them to move in, though Yates continued to work on finishing touches in his spare time. Virginia planted a garden even more extensive than the one she'd left behind in Del Rio, adding fruit trees and berry bushes that would take years to mature. "We'll still be here to enjoy them," she told Yates when he teased her about her long-term planning. "This is our home now for good." Their happiness seemed complete, but Virginia couldn't help noticing the wistful way Yates sometimes watched families with children when they attended church or visited friends. Though they hadn't explicitly discussed starting a family, she knew he wanted children, as did she. As summer approached, Virginia began to suspect that their family might be starting sooner than they'd planned. Her suspicions were confirmed when a visit to the doctor in San Antonio revealed that she was indeed expecting their first child, due in early winter. When she told Yates the news, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit with joy, and he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace before quickly setting her down again. "Sorry," he apologized, his hands hovering protectively near her still flat stomach. "I shouldn't have done that. Are you all right?" Virginia laughed, covering his hands with hers. "I'm perfectly fine, Yates. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them did far more strenuous things than being hugged by their husbands." His concern didn't diminish as her pregnancy progressed. Yates insisted on hiring help for the heavier household chores and convinced Robert Carson to bring in another clerk to share Virginia's workload at the freight office. Virginia allowed these arrangements, touched by his attentiveness though privately amused by his occasional overprotectiveness. As her body changed, growing rounder with their child, Virginia was surprised to find herself more comfortable in her skin than ever before. Pregnancy suited her frame, and for once, her curves were celebrated rather than criticized. Yates, for his part, seemed to find her more beautiful with each passing day, his admiration expressed in both words and tender touches. Their son was born on a cold December morning in 1876, a healthy, robust baby they named Robert Martin Keller, after both their uncles. He had Yates' blue eyes and a dusting of Virginia's chestnut hair, and from the moment he was placed in his father's arms, it was clear Yates was completely besotted. "He's perfect," Yates whispered, carefully returning their son to Virginia's embrace, just like his mother. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Their family grew with the addition of a daughter, Margaret Elizabeth, born in the summer of 1878, and another son, William James, in the spring of 1881. Yates expanded his freight business, eventually taking on partners and establishing regular routes throughout western Texas. Virginia continued to help with the company books when needed, but found her greatest satisfaction in creating a warm, welcoming home for her family and tending to her now extensive gardens. She became known in their community for her hospitality and the beautiful flowers and produce she shared generously with neighbors and friends. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1885, Yates surprised Virginia with a party at their home, inviting friends from San Antonio and even a few from Del Rio, including Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker who had been so kind to Virginia in her youth. "You went all the way to Del Rio to invite her?" Virginia asked in amazement when she saw her old friend. "I sent a letter first to be sure she could make the journey," Yates explained. "But yes, I went to escort her personally. I wanted to thank the woman who made the green dress that caught my eye the first time I saw you at the Hendersons' party." Later that evening, as their guests enjoyed music and refreshments on the sprawling porch Yates had built, he led Virginia to a quiet corner of their garden. There, beneath the arbor covered with climbing roses she had planted years earlier, he presented her with a small box. Inside was a gold locket, beautifully engraved with their initials. When Virginia opened it, she found a tiny photograph of their 3 children on one side and a miniature portrait of herself and Yates on the other. "It's beautiful," she said, immediately putting it on. 10 years, Yates marveled, helping her with the clasp. "Sometimes it feels like we just met, and other times I can hardly remember life before you." Virginia turned in his arms. "Would you do it again? Marry a woman they called too fat for marriage?" Yates' arms tightened around her. "In a heartbeat, though I'd still disagree with their assessment." He kissed her softly. "You've always been, and will always be, exactly the perfect size for my arms." As they rejoined their guests, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of rejection in Del Rio had led her to San Antonio, where she'd found not only a man who truly loved her, but also a community that accepted her, a career that valued her skills, and the confidence to embrace herself exactly as she was. She watched Yates laughing with their children, his face alight with happiness, and knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single step of that journey, not even the painful ones. For they had all led her here, to this life, to this love, to this man who had always seen her true worth. That night, after their guests had departed and their children were asleep, Virginia and Yates stood on their porch, arms around each other as they gazed at the star-filled Texas sky. "Thank you," Virginia said softly. Yates looked down at her. "For what?" "For seeing me," she replied simply. "For loving all of me." He turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done." His blue eyes held hers in the moonlight. "And I intend to keep doing it for at least another 50 years. Virginia smiled up at the man who had changed her life with his honest heart and unwavering love. "That sounds like a perfect plan to me." And as Yates Keller bent to kiss his wife beneath the Texas stars, his arms encircled her completely, just as they had from the very beginning, just as they always would.